Hannah liked the quiet. On a ship as big as the CSS Daedalus, quiet was a rare and precious thing. The ship was a floating city, home to thousands of people from many different worlds. Its corridors were always full of sound. The low hum of the engines was a constant feeling in your bones. The hiss of air vents and the chatter of crew members filled the air. There were always alarms beeping softly somewhere, or the clang of a maintenance bot in the distance. But here, on the lower decks near the secondary environmental control, it was quiet. This was Hannah's favorite place to do her rounds. She was a systems diagnostician. Her job was to listen to the ship. She walked the long, gleaming hallways with a data slate in her hand. Her eyes moved over the readouts on the walls. She checked the numbers that showed the health of the ship. The oxygen levels, the power flow, the heat from the reactors. She looked for the small problems, the tiny errors, before they could become big ones. Hannah was small and quiet herself. She moved through the ship like a shadow. She did not talk much. When she spoke, her words were soft and direct. She used only the words that were needed, and no more. Many people on the ship thought she was shy. Some thought she was unfriendly. Hannah did not mind what they thought. She was not shy. She was just careful with her energy. She had grown up in a small apartment in Busan with a big, loud, loving family. There was always noise. There was always someone talking, laughing, or arguing. She loved them, but it was exhausting. On the Daedalus, she had found a life that suited her. A life of order and silence. Her goal was simple. Do her job perfectly. Do not get noticed. Go back to her room and enjoy the peace. She had turned down promotions twice. Promotion would mean more meetings. It would mean managing other people. It would mean talking. Hannah did not want to talk. She wanted to listen to the machines. Machines made sense. They followed rules. If something was wrong, you could find the broken part and fix it. People were not like that. She finished her check of the environmental controls. Everything was green. Good. She tapped her data slate and moved on. Her boots made no sound on the polished floor. She passed a group of engineers from the Xylosian contingent. They were tall, elegant beings with smooth, dark skin that looked almost like polished stone. They spoke in low, clicking sounds. They glanced at her as she passed. Hannah kept her eyes forward and gave a small, polite nod. She did not stop. The Xylosians were a proud species. They believed their technology was the best in the galaxy. They thought humans were messy and unpredictable. Hannah had read all the technical manuals for their systems. She knew their technology was good, but it was not perfect. They just hated to admit when it was broken. Her shift ended without any problems. This was a good day. She rode the transport tube to the crew living quarters. The galley was busy. It was the main dinner hour. The room was large and bright, filled with the smell of food from a dozen different worlds. Hannah did not like crowds. She would wait for the rush to end. She found a small table in a corner, away from everyone. She pulled out her personal datapad and read a book. It was an old, printed book from Earth translated into Korean. A story about a quiet fisherman on a quiet sea. It was her favorite. She waited for almost an hour. The crowd slowly thinned out. Her stomach felt a little upset. She thought a cup of ginger tea would help. She walked over to the service counter where the food dispensers were. The large, Xylosian-made machine took up one whole wall. It was supposed to make any food or drink you asked for. Today, it seemed to be having trouble. A line of annoyed crew members stood waiting. The two human cafeteria workers, a man named Jean and a woman named Sue, were looking stressed. They were tapping at the control panel. "It's the nutrient slurry pump again," Jean said, shaking his head. "It just stutters and stops." "The diagnostic says everything is fine," Sue replied, slapping the side of the machine. "It's definitely not fine." Hannah stood to the side, waiting. She did not need the dispenser. She just needed to get a packet of ginger from the shelf behind the counter. But she would have to wait for Jean or Sue to finish. She watched the machine. She could hear the uneven rhythm of the pump. It was a specific sound. A quick whir, a hesitation, then another whir. She had read about this. It was a harmonic misalignment. The pump was not broken. It was just out of sync with its own motor. A simple, physical tap in the right place could sometimes jolt it back. The Xylosian repair protocol involved taking the whole thing apart, which took hours. The human solution was much faster. Just as she was about to ask Jean for the ginger, the main doors to the galley slid open with a sharp hiss. Commander Vex of the Xylosian Corps stood there. He was tall even for his kind. His dark, chitinous plates seemed to gleam under the lights. His long face was set in a look of pure annoyance. Everyone in the galley seemed to get a little quieter. Commander Vex was known for his bad temper and his high opinion of himself. He strode toward the counter, his hard feet clicking on the floor. He completely ignored the line of waiting crew. "This is unacceptable," he snapped, his voice a sharp click. "The new dispensers were supposed to be flawless. My associates are waiting in the observation lounge for their evening meal. They are very important. This delay is a disgrace." Jean looked nervous. "We're sorry, Commander. The machine is not responding. We've run the diagnostics." "Your diagnostics are useless," Vex said. He looked around, his sharp eyes scanning the area. They landed on Hannah. She was still standing off to the side, dressed in her simple gray sweats. She was small. She was quiet. She was near the service counter. She was not in a uniform. He had seen her before, in the corridors. He had never spoken to her. He had never asked what she did. In his mind, he sorted people quickly. Important people wore uniforms or Xylosian robes. Unimportant people wore plain clothes and stayed in the background. This human female was clearly unimportant. A service worker. Probably the new one they had hired for the galley. He pointed a long, four-jointed finger at her. "You," he said, his tone full of command. "The new cafeteria worker. Fix the dispenser. Now, my associates cannot be kept waiting by human incompetence." Hannah looked up from her datapad. She was surprised. She met his gaze for a second. She saw no curiosity there, only impatience and a deep-seated assumption. She opened her mouth to speak. She was going to say, "I am not a cafeteria worker," but the words did not come out. He had already turned away, talking into his personal comms unit, complaining to someone about the poor quality of the ship's support staff. Hannah felt a flush of irritation, but then her practical nature took over. Arguing with him would take time and energy. It would be trouble. It would be noise. It was easier to just look at the machine. It would take 5 minutes. Then she could get her ginger and leave. She could avoid the trouble. She walked over to the dispenser. Jean and Sue gave her an apologetic look. "Sorry about him," Jean whispered. "The manual is useless, and we're not authorized to open the core housing." Hannah gave a small, slight smile. It was not a warm smile, but it was not unfriendly. It was just a fact. A small movement of the lips. "It is okay," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. She looked at the smooth, sealed panel of the dispenser. She ran her fingers lightly over it, not to feel the surface, but to listen. She could feel the vibration of the stuttering pump through the metal. She knew exactly where the access point was. A small, unmarked panel near the base. She reached into the pocket of her sweats and pulled out a standard multi-tool that all engineers carried. She did not open the panel. That would be a violation. Instead, she turned the tool around, holding the hard, metal handle. She located the spot. With 3 quick, precise taps, she hit the panel.
Top. Top.
Tap. The machine made a choking sound. Then, the whirring of the pump evened out into a smooth, steady hum. The error light on the main display blinked from red to yellow. Hannah's fingers flew over the public control panel, inputting a manual calibration sequence. It was a sequence she had figured out herself from reading the public schematics. The Xylosians did not want anyone to know it. The light on the display turned a solid, steady green. A low hum filled the air. The dispenser was online. Hannah turned to Jean and Sue. Their mouths were slightly open. "It will work for now," Hannah said, her voice still soft. "But the dampener coil is under spec. It will fail again in 72 hours. She put her multi-tool back in her pocket. She then walked behind the counter, picked up a single packet of ginger from the shelf, and nodded to the two workers. Without another word, without looking at Commander Vex, she walked out of the galley. The doors hissed shut behind her, leaving a profound silence in her wake. The smooth, steady hum of the food dispenser was the only sound for a long moment. Jean and Sue stared at the green light, then at each other, then at the door through which the small, quiet woman had just disappeared. "Did you see that?" Jean finally whispered, his voice full of awe. 3 taps. She just tapped it. Sue shook her head slowly. And she knew the manual calibration code. "Even I don't have that code. The Xylosians keep it locked down." Commander Vex finished his comms call and turned back, expecting to see the human worker still struggling. Instead, he saw the dispenser glowing with a healthy green light. The 2 human attendants were looking at him with strange expressions. "It is fixed?" Vex asked, his clicking voice suspicious. "Yes, Commander," Jean said, nodding quickly. "It's working now." Vex's sharp eyes narrowed. He had not expected a solution so fast. He had expected more failure, more proof of human inadequacy. This result was inconvenient. He strode to the dispenser and entered the code for his associate's complex Xylosian meal. The machine whirred perfectly, and a moment later, a tray of steaming, intricately arranged food slid out. A flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Had the machine simply started working on its own? Had the human attendants fixed it? But no, he had seen them failing just moments before. It must have been that other one, the small, quiet one he had ordered to fix it. He felt a small surge of satisfaction. Of course, she had probably just reset it. A simple, brute force solution. Typical human thinking. No elegance. No understanding of the sophisticated systems at work. "See that it does not happen again," he said, his tone dismissive. He took the tray and left the galley, his pride mostly restored. The incident was already fading from his mind, a minor irritation now resolved. For Hannah, the incident was also over. She returned to her small, private quarters. The room was neat and sparse. There was a bed, a desk, a small viewport showing the endless star-dusted black of space. There were no personal photos, no decorations. Her only luxury was a small, traditional Korean tea set. She filled her electric kettle and set it to boil. She took out a small bag of roasted barley and prepared her tea. The simple, earthy smell filled the room, calming her. She sat at her desk and sipped the hot tea. She thought about the dispenser, the dampener coil. It was a known point of failure. She had seen it in the public performance logs. The Xylosians would never admit it. They would let the machine break over and over again rather than acknowledge a flaw in their design. It was a stupid way to run a ship, but it was not her problem. She had avoided a direct confrontation. She had gotten her ginger. The trouble had passed. The next day was a normal shift. Hannah did her rounds in the quiet lower decks. She checked the oxygen scrubbers and the power conduits. She found a small leak in a hydraulic line and filed a repair order. It was a good, quiet day. She spoke to no one except to give a brief report to the maintenance bot that arrived to fix the leak. Meanwhile, in the main galley, the food dispenser worked perfectly. Jean and Sue served lunch to a long line of crew members without any issues. "She was amazing," Jean said to Sue during a quiet moment. "That woman from yesterday. I've never seen anyone do that." "I know," Sue agreed. "I looked her up in the crew database. Her name is Hannah. She's a systems diagnostician. Level 4. She's got one of the highest efficiency ratings on the ship." Jean whistled softly. A diagnostician? And Vex thought she was a cafeteria worker. Oh, that's rich. They both laughed. It felt good to have a small secret, a small victory against the arrogant Xylosian commander. But exactly 72 hours later, as Hannah had predicted, the trouble returned. Hannah was in the galley again, this time for a late lunch. The crowd was thin. She was getting a simple bowl of soup from the dispenser when she heard it. The familiar, stuttering whir from the machine next to hers. Then, a loud clunk, and a puff of gray smoke came from the vent. The machine's lights went from green to a flashing, angry red. An alarm beeped softly. Jean and Sue rushed over. No, 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 Jean mutered. Not again. Before they could even try a reset, the galley doors hissed open. Commander Vex stood there. His face was a mask of cold fury. He had been on his way to the same machine. His important associates were visiting again. He saw the red light. He saw the smoke. He saw Jean and Sue looking panicked. And then he saw Hannah. She was standing right there, a bowl of soup in her hands. She was, once again, in simple gray sweats. His anger found a perfect target. You, he snapped, striding towards her. His long finger pointed accusingly. This is your doing. Your primitive tampering yesterday. You broke the machine. Hannah stood very still. She held her bowl of soup. She said nothing. She just looked at him. Your reckless actions have voided the warranty. Vex continued, his voice rising. You have caused significant damage to a core ship system. I should have you confined to quarters. Jean found his voice. Commander, wait. She was just trying to help. Be silent. Vex turned his glare on Jean, who shrunk back. Then he turned back to Hannah. What do you have to say for yourself? Hannah took a slow breath. She looked at the smoking machine, then back at Vex. Her voice was calm and flat. The dampener coil failed, as I said it would. This only made Vex angrier. She was not apologizing. She was not scared. She was stating a fact. It was infuriating. You are not an engineer. You are a service worker. You had no authority to touch this machine, he declared. I am filing a formal complaint. You will answer for this. He turned on his heel and marched out of the galley, already speaking into his comms unit. Hannah stood there, holding her soup. It was getting cold. She looked at the broken machine. She looked at the worried faces of Jean and Sue. The quiet life she had built so carefully was cracking. Trouble had found her. It had not passed by after all. It had circled back. She put her cold soup bowl down on a table. She did not feel hungry anymore. The feeling in her stomach was not hunger. It was a slow, cold simmer of anger. She had tried to be helpful. She had tried to be invisible. She had done everything right. And still, because of one man's pride and his stupid assumptions, she was in trouble. She walked back to her quarters. The quiet of her room felt different now. It was not peaceful. It was heavy. She sat at her desk and stared out at the stars. She thought about the complaint. A formal inquiry. It would mean talking. It would mean explaining herself to people who might not listen. It would mean noise and drama. All the things she had come to this ship to avoid. A part of her wanted to just let it happen. To go to the inquiry, tell the truth, and hope they would see reason. But another, stronger part of her was waking up. The part that had grown up in a loud family and learned to hold her ground. The part that knew, with absolute certainty, that she was right and he was wrong. Commander Vex had judged her based on her clothes and her silence. He had seen a cafeteria worker. He had seen someone who was not important. He had misjudged her. He thought the trouble was that she had broken his machine. He did not yet understand that the real trouble was that he had broken her peace. She stood up and went to her terminal. She logged in with her high-level engineering access. She had tried to avoid trouble, but now that it was here, she would not run from it. If Commander Vex wanted a fight over a broken food dispenser, she would give him one. But it would not be the fight he expected. She began to type, her fingers moving quickly and surely across the screen. She was not looking up the food dispenser manuals. She was pulling the complete, uncensored performance logs for every Xylosion-made system on the CSS Daedalus, the environmental controls, the waste reclamation processors, the secondary navigation arrays. She was going to find every single hidden flaw, every buried error report, every underspec part. She was going to learn everything about his perfect technology. The quiet in the room was now the quiet of deep concentration, the quiet before the storm. The summons to Chief Engineer Day's office came the next morning. It was a formal message, not a casual request. It listed the reason as formal inquiry, unauthorized intervention on Xylosion galley systems. Hannah read the words on her datapad. Her face showed no emotion. She finished her morning tea, washed her cup, and left her quarters. The walk to Day's office felt longer than usual. The hum of the ship seemed louder. People she passed in the corridor felt like faces in a crowd. She kept her eyes forward, her mind focused. She had spent most of the night reading performance logs. She had found what she was looking for. The data was stored securely on her private drive. Chief Engineer Day's office was a practical space. It was full of schematics on data screens and parts catalogs. Day was a solid, capable man with a tired but kind face. He believed in fixing problems, not talking about them. He did not like inquiries. When Hannah entered, Commander Vex was already there. He stood tall and rigid by the window, his back to the room. He did not turn when she came in. Day was sitting behind his desk. He gestured for Hannah to take the seat opposite him. "Hannah," Day began, his voice neutral. "Thank you for coming. Commander Vex has filed a serious complaint. He states that you tampered with the Xylosian food dispenser, causing critical damage and voiding its warranty. He says you acted without authorization. What is your side of this?" Before Hannah could speak, Vex turned around. His eyes were cold. "There is no side," he clicked. "The facts are simple. I found this individual loitering near the machine. I instructed her, as a member of the service crew, to assist. She then performed an unsanctioned physical intervention. 3 days later, the unit suffered a catastrophic failure of its dampener coil. The repair cost will be significant. Her actions are the direct cause." Day looked at Hannah. His expression was unreadable, but he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was her turn. Hannah folded her hands in her lap. She looked at Day, not at Vex. "Commander Vex is incorrect," she said, her voice quiet but clear in the small room. "I did not loiter. I was waiting to get a packet of ginger for tea. He pointed at me and said, 'You, the new cafeteria worker. Fix the dispenser. Now.' I did not correct him because I thought it would be faster to just look at the machine." Vex made a sharp, dismissive sound. "A trivial detail," Hannah continued, still looking at Day. "The machine had a harmonic misalignment in its nutrient slurry pump. It is a common flaw in that model. The Xylosian repair protocol is to replace the entire pump assembly, a 6-hour job. I used a resonant frequency tap with a standard multi-tool handle to realign it. This is a known, if unofficial, field fix. I then input a manual calibration to stabilize the flow rate. The machine functioned perfectly after that. Until it exploded," Vex interjected. "Until the dampener coil failed." Hannah corrected him, finally turning her gaze to him. "As I told the galley workers, Jean and Sue, it would. Exactly 72 hours later. The coil is part number DC7 Alpha. It is rated for a continuous load of 9.7 kilojoules. The pump, even when calibrated, regularly peaks at 11.2 kilojoules. The coil was doomed to fail. It was not a question of if, but when. My actions did not cause the failure. They delayed it." Commander Vex stared at her. He was stunned into silence for a moment. How did this quiet human know the internal part number? How did she know the load specifications? This was proprietary Xylosian information. Day leaned forward, a spark of interest in his eyes. "How do you know the load specifications for a Xylosian dampener coil, Hannah?" "I read the public technical schematics for the Deadless," she said simply. "The data is available in the engineering archive. The pump's energy draw is listed. The coil specifications are inferred from its size, material composition, and the failure patterns in the public maintenance logs. It is simple math." Vex found his voice again, fueled by outrage. "This is absurd. She is guessing. She is constructing a fantasy to cover her incompetence. A cafeteria worker playing engineer." Now Day's face changed. A slow, hard smile spread across his lips. He looked from Vex's furious face to Hannah's calm one. "Commander," Day said, his voice dangerously calm, "I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "This is Hannah. She is my top systems diagnostician. She is not a cafeteria worker. She probably knows more about the inner workings of this ship, including your systems, than I do. If she says the coil was under spec and doomed to fail, then I believe her. It was doomed to fail. The change in the room was instant. The air grew thick. Commander Vex's proud posture seemed to shrink just a little. The chitinous plates on his neck tightened. He had been publicly, utterly wrong. He had not just misidentified a crew member. He had insulted a specialist to her boss. The embarrassment was a hot, sharp feeling in his chest. But worse than the embarrassment was the anger. The anger that this human woman had made him look like a fool that he could not back down. His pride would not allow it. "Her rank is irrelevant," he snapped, his voice losing its polished click and becoming rough. She touched a system she was not authorized to touch. She bypassed official protocols. That is a breach of security. The complaint stands. Day sighed. He looked tired of the whole situation. "Hannah, while your solution was clever, the commander has a point about protocol. You should have directed him to the proper maintenance channel." Hannah nodded. "I understand, Chief. But at the time, it seemed the most efficient path to avoid a disruption." She almost said, "to avoid trouble." "A disruption you have now caused," Vex said, latching onto Day's words. "This matter is not closed. The formal inquiry will proceed. I will see to it that she is disciplined for her reckless behavior." He turned and stormed out of the office, the door sliding shut behind him with a sharp hiss. Day leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Well, Hannah, you certainly know how to attract the quiet kind of trouble, don't you?" "I was trying to avoid it," she said, her voice soft again. "I know," Day said, "but you poked a Xylosian's pride. They have a lot of it and it bruises easily. He can't let this go now. He'll push for a full hearing." Hannah was silent for a moment. "What happens at the hearing?" "A panel of officers will listen. They will review the evidence. Vex will argue his case. You will argue yours. They will decide if you broke the rules." He looked at her closely. "You said you have data? From the public logs?" "Yes, Chief." "Good. Stick to the facts. Just the facts." He waved a hand. "Go on. Get back to work." Hannah stood and left the office. The corridor outside felt different. The encounter had changed something. Before, the trouble had been a cloud on the horizon. Now it was a storm directly overhead. Commander Vex was not going to let this go. He was going to use the rules to punish her for his own mistake. She walked back to her station, but her mind was not on the oxygen scrubbers or the power conduits. It was on the data she had collected. Day had said to stick to the facts. She would. But she would bring all the facts. She had tried the quiet, reasonable path. It had not worked. Commander Vex had mistaken her silence for weakness. He had mistaken her efficiency for a simple fix. He had mistaken her for someone who could be pushed aside. He was about to learn the cost of that misjudgment. The hearing would not be about one broken food dispenser. She would make sure of that. If he wanted to talk about systemic failures, she was prepared to have that conversation. She was going to show them all what happened when you pushed a quiet person who had nothing left to lose but her peace and quiet. The day of the formal inquiry arrived. The room was different from Chief Day's office. It was colder, more official. A long, polished table stood at one end. 3 senior officers sat behind it. There was a stern-looking human woman, Captain Evans, the head of ship security. Next to her was a Tellarite, Commander Gron, his broad face impassive. And on the end was a Xylosian, Subcommander Kale, who looked as rigid and proud as Vex. Hannah sat at a small table alone. She wore her clean, pressed engineering coveralls. She looked small in the large room. Commander Vex sat at another table. He looked confident. He had a data slate full of official reports and warranty documents. Captain Evans opened the proceedings. This inquiry is to determine if crew member Hannah violated ship protocol by performing an unauthorized repair on a Xylosian food dispenser, resulting in significant damage. Commander Vex, you may present your case. Vex stood up. He was a good speaker. He laid out his argument clearly. He showed the official work order for the dispenser's initial malfunction. He showed the massive cost estimate for the repair, highlighting the voided warranty. He played a security video from the galley that showed Hannah tapping the machine with her multi-tool. "You see," Vex said, pointing at the screen. "A crude physical strike. This is not approved procedure. This is the action of an untrained person, using force where knowledge is required." This fix directly led to the stress that destroyed the dampener coil. He sat down, looking satisfied. He had presented facts, figures, and a clear sequence of events. Captain Evans turned to Hannah. "Crewmember Hannah, how do you respond?" Hannah stood up. She did not look at Vex. She looked at the three officers. Her heart was beating fast, but her hands were steady. She connected her datapad to the room's main display screen. "Commander Vex's timeline is correct," she began, her voice soft but clear. "But his conclusion is wrong. The dispenser did not fail because of my actions. It failed because of a design flaw." A murmur went through the room. Subcommander Kale leaned forward, his expression dark. Hannah continued. "The dispenser is not an isolated system. It is part of the Xylosian Environmental Control Cluster, Model ECC-55, which manages atmosphere and utilities for this sector of the ship." The screen behind her lit up with a complex schematic. It was the official diagram for the ECC-55. "The failure of the DC-7 alpha dampener coil in the dispenser is a symptom," Hannah said. She zoomed in on a different part of the schematic. "The cause is here, in the ECC-55's primary filtration sequencer." She brought up a new window. It was filled with lines of data. According to the public performance logs, which every engineer on this ship can access, the filtration sequencer has a documented failure rate of 18%. This part was sold to us as high reliability. Subcommander Kale spoke for the first time, his voice a low click. "Those logs can be misinterpreted. A failure code does not always mean a physical failure." Hannah nodded. "That is true." She tapped her datapad. "So I cross-referenced it with the power grid logs." Another set of data appeared on the screen. This one showed energy spikes. Every time the sequencer registers a failure, it draws a surge of power from the grid to reset itself. This surge is channeled through the entire ECC-55 network, including the galley dispensers. She looked directly at Subcommander Kale. "The dampener coil in the dispenser is rated for a continuous load of 9.7 kilojoules. The power surges from the faulty sequencer regularly peak at 11.2 kilojoules. The coil was being cooked, slowly every single day. My intervention 3 days before it failed did not cause the problem. The problem was already there. The coil was a ticking bomb." The room was completely silent. The officers stared at the data. It was clear. It was logical. It was undeniable. Commander Vex stood up, his face a mask of fury and panic. "This is a distraction. She is throwing out random data to confuse the issue. She is not authorized to analyze our systems." Hannah did not back down. She looked at him, her calm eyes meeting his angry ones. "You were not kept waiting by human incompetence, Commander. You were kept waiting by Xylosian pride. You designed a system too proud to report its own flaws. You blamed the first quiet person you saw for pointing it out." She turned back to the screen. With a few more taps, she brought up a final, devastating display. It was a list, a long list of every Xylosian-made system on the Deadless. Next to each one was a number. "These are not my opinions. These are the ship's own numbers. The ECC-55 has 47 documented errors in the last month alone. The waste reclamation processors have 12. The secondary navigation array has 19. All these errors were automatically flagged by the system and then buried by its own internal software to preserve the high reliability status and avoid warranty claims." She looked at the panel. "The question is not whether I tapped a machine with a tool. The question is why we are flying a ship with systems that hide their own failures. The real breach of protocol is ignoring that for the sake of pride." She sat down. The only sound was the low hum of the display screen. Captain Evans, Commander Graun, and Subcommander Kale looked at each other. The anger on Kale's face was gone, replaced by a cold, Grim realization. The evidence was irrefutable. This was no longer about a cafeteria worker. This was about the safety of the ship. Captain Evans spoke, her voice firm and final. The inquiry is concluded. Crewmember Hannah, you are cleared of all charges. Your methods were unorthodox, but your diagnosis was correct. Thank you for bringing this systemic issue to our attention. She turned to the Xylosians. Commander Vex, Subcommander Kale. My office. Now, we have a great deal to discuss about our maintenance schedules. The officers stood and left the room. Commander Vex did not look at Hannah as he walked out. His shoulders were slumped. He had lost completely. He had not just lost the argument. He had been exposed as a fool, and his people's technology had been exposed as flawed. Hannah was left alone in the quiet room. She gathered her datapad and stood up. She walked out into the corridor. The wait was gone. The trouble was over. She saw Chief Day waiting for her down the hall. He was leaning against the wall, a wide grin on his face. I heard, he said. You didn't just stick to the facts. You brought the whole library. Hannah gave a small, genuine smile. It was the first real smile in days. He left me no choice. Day nodded, his expression turning serious and proud. You know, for someone who tries so hard to avoid trouble, you certainly know how to end it. That was the most brilliant piece of diagnostics I've ever seen. You didn't fix a machine today, Hannah. You might have just fixed the ship. Hannah looked down the long, quiet corridor. It was the same corridor she always walked. But it felt different. She felt different. The quiet was no longer something she had to hide in. It was a part of her, a strength that others had mistaken for weakness. She had not wanted this fight, but she had won it. And she had her peace back. It was a better peace now. It was a peace she had earned. The silence in the corridor felt clean. The heavy door of the inquiry room hissed shut behind Hannah, cutting off the last bit of that tense atmosphere. She took a deep breath. It was over. The official wait was gone. She could feel the knot in her stomach, which had been tight for days, finally begin to loosen. Chief Day pushed himself off the wall, his grin wide and full of genuine admiration. I heard, he said, falling into step beside her as she began to walk. You didn't just stick to the facts. You brought the whole library and dropped it on their heads. Hannah gave a small, quiet shrug, but the corner of her mouth twitched upwards. It was not her usual polite smile. It was something warmer, something earned. He left me no choice, she said simply. Day nodded, his own smile fading into a look of deep respect. You know, for someone who tries so hard to avoid trouble, you certainly know how to end it. That was the most brilliant piece of systems work I've ever seen. You didn't just fix a machine today, Hannah. You might have just fixed the entire ship. They walked for a while in a comfortable silence. The ship's normal sounds, the hum, the distant chatter, the whisper of the vents, seemed to have returned to their proper volume. They were no longer a loud, annoying noise. They were just the sound of the deadless living and breathing. Take the rest of the day off, Day said as they reached a junction in the corridor. You've earned it. Actually, that's an order. Hannah nodded. Thank you, Chief. She turned and headed not towards her quarters, but towards the main galley. She realized she was hungry, truly hungry, for the first time in days. When she entered the galley, it was busy with the midday lunch crowd. The line for the dispensers was long. Jean and Sue were working quickly, serving food and talking to crew members. The repaired Xylosian dispenser was back online, humming smoothly. Jean saw her first. His eyes went wide, and he nudged Sue. The news, it seemed, traveled fast on a starship. Sue looked over, and a huge smile broke out on her face. They both stopped what they were doing for a moment. Hannah went to the back of the line. She didn't mind waiting. She watched the people. She saw a group of human engineers laughing. She saw a Xylosian scientist get his food without any problem. It was all normal. It was what she had wanted to protect. When she finally reached the front of the line, Jean leaned over the counter, his voice an excited whisper. Is it true? You faced down Commander Vex in a formal inquiry? And you won. Sue joined him, her eyes shining. We heard you showed them all the hidden errors, that you proved it was their fault all along. Hannah felt a slight flush on her cheeks. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. I just showed them the data, she said softly. You're a hero, Jean said a little too loudly. A few people in line turned to look. Hannah shook her head quickly.
No.
I am not. I just wanted to be left alone. Sue laughed. Well, sometimes you have to make a big noise to get your quiet back. She then reached under the counter and pulled out a small, sealed container. Here, this is for you. It's not from the dispenser. Hannah took it. It was a container of fresh, homemade kimchi. Thank you, she said, genuinely touched. Thank you, Sue replied, for standing up for us, too. Hannah took her regular meal from the dispenser and found her usual small table in the corner. She ate slowly, watching the life of the ship go on around her. Felt different now. She was still an observer, but she didn't feel like she was hiding. She was just Hannah, having lunch. Later, back in her quarters, the quiet felt deeper and more peaceful than ever before. She made a cup of barley tea, the rich, toasty smell filling the room. She sat at her desk and looked out at the stars. The inquiry was over. Her record was clean. Commander Vex had been thoroughly reprimanded. A ship-wide audit of all Xylosion systems had been ordered. She had won. But the real victory was inside her. The simmering anger was gone. The frustration had vanished. She had faced the trouble she had tried so hard to avoid, and she had discovered she was stronger than it. Commander Vex had seen a cafeteria worker because he only looked at her clothes and her silence. He never saw the sharp, analytical mind behind the quiet eyes. He never saw the person who found peace in complex data streams and system schematics. He had misjudged her. And that was his greatest failure. A soft chime came from her door. She was not expecting anyone. She walked over and opened it. Standing in the corridor was a young Xylosian she had never seen before. He was smaller than Vex, and his posture was less rigid. He held a data slate nervously. Remember Hannah? He asked, his clicking voice softer than Vex. Yes. I am Apprentice Tech Kale. Subcommander Kale sent me. He offered her the data slate. He asked me to give you this. It is the full, uncensored technical library for the ECC-55 and its subsidiary systems. No hidden error codes. No buried reports. He said, if anyone on this ship can find the real problems, it is you. Hannah took the data slate, felt heavy in her hand. It was not an apology. It was something better. It was respect. Thank you, she said. The young Xylosian nodded quickly and hurried away. Hannah closed the door and looked at the data slate. She placed it on her desk, next to her teacup. She would look at it later. For now, she just wanted to sit. She wanted to enjoy the quiet. She had her peace back. But it was a new kind of peace. It was not fragile anymore. It was strong. It was a peace that knew it could defend itself. She took a sip of her tea. It was perfect. The ship hummed around her. A steady, comforting sound. Everything was back to normal. But she was not the same person she had been before. And that, she thought as she watched the stars drift by, was a very good thing. A week passed. The rhythm of life on the Deadless settled into a new normal. The audit of the Xylosion systems had begun. A massive project led by a team of engineers from different species. Chief Day had asked Hannah to join the team. She had politely declined. She preferred her own rounds, her own quiet diagnostics. He had not been surprised. Just be on call, he had said. As a consultant, that she could do. Her life returned to its familiar patterns. The early shift, the walk through the quiet lower decks, the lunch in the corner of the galley. But the air around her had changed. People nodded to her now as she passed. Not everyone, but some. The human engineers, especially, gave her looks of respect. Jean and Sue always saved a smile for her. She was no longer a ghost. She was a person who had done a remarkable thing. One afternoon, she was running a diagnostic on a power relay node deep in the ship. It was a solitary, satisfying task. Her data slate chirped with an incoming message. It was from Chief Day. The text was simple. Need a consult on Deck 12, Section Gamma. The ECC-55 audit team is stuck. They can't find the source of a pressure fluctuation. Thought you might have an idea. Hannah finished her calibration and headed for the transport tube. Deck 12 was one of the main hubs for the environmental systems. When she arrived at Section Gamma, she found a small crowd. There were 2 human engineers, a Tellarite, and Subcommander Kale himself, standing before a large, complex wall of Xylosian machinery. The panels were open, revealing a maze of crystalline circuitry and shimmering conduits. The engineers looked frustrated. Subcommander Kale looked tense. Chief Day saw her and waved her over. Hannah, good. They've been at it for 6 hours. The pressure in the starboard atmospheric scrubbers keeps spiking. They've replaced 3 different regulators. No change. The 2 human engineers moved aside to let her see the readouts. They didn't seem annoyed by her presence. They looked hopeful. Subcommander Kale watched her, his expression unreadable. Hannah studied the screen. The data stream showed a sharp, regular spike in pressure every 47 minutes. It was a clean, repeating pattern. That was good. A clean pattern usually meant a single cause. The regulators are not the problem, she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. They are reacting to the spike, not causing it. She turned from the main screen and looked at the physical machine. Her eyes moved over the components. She ignored the complex crystals and the glowing tubes. She looked at the simpler, more mundane parts. The support frames, the junction boxes, the coolant lines. Her eyes stopped on a thick, insulated pipe that ran along the ceiling above the ECC-55 unit. It was a primary waste heat conduit, carrying excess thermal energy away from the main reactors. It was a human design system. She pointed at it. That conduit. It goes into a thermal cycle every 47 minutes to purge excess heat. Is that correct? One of the human engineers checked his data slate. Yes, exactly 47 minutes. Hannah walked closer to the ECC-55. She placed her hand not on the Xylosian machine, but on the bulkhead next to it. She could feel a very faint, very regular vibration. A deep, low thrum that came and went. The conduit expands when it heats up, she explained, her voice calm and logical. When it expands, it presses against the structural beam behind this wall. That beam transfers the mechanical stress directly into the main housing of the ECC-55. She turned to Subcommander Kale. Your systems are very sensitive to physical harmonic vibrations. The pressure spike is a resonance issue. It is not a flaw in your software or your parts. It is the ship itself talking to your machine. And your machine is listening. There was a moment of stunned silence. The problem was not in the complex Xylosian technology. It was in the physical shaking of the ship. Subcommander Kale stepped forward. He looked from the conduit to the ECC-55 unit, then back to Hannah. His rigid posture seemed to soften just a little. A resonance issue, he repeated, the clicks of his language thoughtful. We had not considered external physical factors. Our diagnostics are entirely internal. One of the human engineers slapped his forehead. Of course. It's like an old car rattling a dashboard. We were looking at the radio, not the engine mount. Chief Day grinned. So, the fix. Install a half-inch of high-density polymer padding between the conduit and the beam, Hannah said. It will dampen the vibration. The pressure spikes should stop. The engineers immediately started talking, pulling up schematics of the conduit mounting brackets. The problem was solved. It had taken her less than 5 minutes. Subcommander Kale did not join them. He stood looking at Hannah for a long moment. He then gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a Xylosian gesture of deep respect. Remember, Hannah, he said, your method of observation is unique. You see the whole system, not just the pieces. Thank you. He did not say anything more. He did not need to. He turned and walked away, joining his team to oversee the simple, physical fix. Chief Day clapped a hand on Hannah's shoulder. See? Consultant. I knew it. You're too valuable to leave down in the lower decks all by yourself. Hannah looked around the busy section. People were working, talking, solving problems. It was loud. It was social. It was everything she usually avoided. I like the lower decks, she said quietly. Day laughed. I know you do. Don't worry, your job is safe. But just remember, this ship needs your eyes, even when you're trying to hide them. Hannah returned to her rounds. The rest of her shift was quiet. That evening, she went to the galley. It was late, and the room was almost empty. She got her food and went to her corner table. A few minutes later, Jean came over. He was holding 2 cups of tea. He put one down in front of her. It's barley tea, he said. I heard you like it. Hannah looked at the cup, then up at Jin's kind, open face. Thank you, she said. You're welcome, he replied. He hesitated for a second, then asked, Do you mind if I sit for a minute? Hannah was surprised. She looked at the empty chair opposite her. She looked at the quiet room. For a moment, her old instinct kicked in. The instinct to be alone, to protect her quiet. But the quiet felt stronger now, could handle a little company. She nodded. Okay. Jean sat down. He didn't try to make a lot of conversation. He just talked about his day, about a new recipe he wanted the dispensers to try. It was easy. It was nice. Hannah sipped her tea and listened. The ship hummed around them. She was still herself. She was still the quiet woman from Busan who loved silence and order. But her world had gotten just a little bit bigger. She had stood her ground, and the ground had held. She had defended her peace, and in doing so, she had found she could share a little of it, too. She finished her tea and her meal. She said goodnight to Jean and walked back to her quarters. The stars outside her viewport were bright and steady. Everything was as it should be.